controversial, taboo issue in this video. Um, I'm someone who believes that there should be nothing off the table, so to speak. Um, Nothing should be undiscussed. Sometimes debates can get heated and they're not a lot of fun, let's face it. But that doesn't mean that things should not be brought up. What I want to talk about here is the subject of violence um, regarding women. Um, Now, as a man, I've been brought up to believe, and I still do believe, that a man should not use physical force against a woman. Um, a man shouldn't hit a woman. A man shouldn't use his physical strength against her. Why? Because I think this comes from several notions. Firstly, the average man is physically stronger than the average woman, therefore, it's a mismatch, so to speak. Just like you wouldn't have, maybe this is a bad comparison, but you wouldn't have a heavyweight boxer fighting a lightweight boxer because it would be a mismatch. It just wouldn't work out. So if a man and a woman are in a physical altercation and he uses violence against her, he is almost universally seen as being in the wrong because he is taking advantage of an asset that he has that she doesn't have, which is physical strength. So it's unfair. That is the perception. Um, it also is related to the fact that, let's face it, there are men out there who basically bully their wives and their girlfriends into utter submission. And this is something that cannot be taken lightly. There are far too many women that literally live in fear of their partner. And I think that is utterly despicable. I mean, the situation is utterly despicable. Um, I think men who routinely use violence against women are the absolute scum of the earth. I really do. And I guess every man says this, but I find it very hard to keep my cool with a man like that. Especially if it was someone I knew, and I knew for a fact that she was being constantly abused by him. Um, so I would say that it's a sort of universal value, or at least in this country, it is. In other parts of the world, it might be seen as more acceptable that using violence against women is wrong. But if we are really to be in an egalitarian age, and if we're really to look at an egalitarian principle of things, then it should also be seen as wrong, women using violence against men. Now, there has been perhaps a slight improvement in this in recent years. I would say a majority of people would also condemn that. You know, I'm not so cynical as some MRAs who say, oh, that, everyone laughs at it and so on. Actually, I don't think they do. I think there is definitely a contingent who trivialize it and who would think it's no big deal. And those people we should challenge and we should condemn that position. I know there was a social experiment done in the US a few years ago, and it sort of showed this man being beaten up in public by his girlfriend. Not a single person intervened. Several people even laughed. A cop walked past, he didn't care. Obviously, goes without saying, had the situation been reversed, people would have intervened. Um, that is clearly not right. I think again it comes down to a perception of men supposed to be a bit physically stronger. I'm going to quote a newspaper which I usually despise, and I still, this is a paper I've got no time for. But there was one occasion when I have to give them credit. I'm talking about the Sun. And I give them credit because they did feature the issue of men being abused in domestic violence situations. Now, as much as I dislike the Sun, I have to give them credit for that particular report because it did highlight an important issue. And what spoke about was men who had been abused, but they didn't fight back. And we're not talking here about sort of physically weak men or men who are easily pushed around. These are just run of the mill average guys, but they happen to be in a relationship with a partner that was violent. Now, people say, well, why do these people stay with their violent partner? I think it's slightly different between men and women. I think women stay with a violent partner because they sort of get brainwashed into the idea that he doesn't mean it and he only does it when he loses his temper. And those guys are clever because they'll balance it out, they'll manipulate, they'll balance it out. Probably he'll beat her up, and then the next day he'll bring her out for an expensive meal. That's how they work. So they manipulate their victims. In a similar way, I think men in domestic violence situations feel a combination of barriers which is why they stay in the relationship. Sometimes there could be children involved, and that is true of both sorts of domestic violence, whereby they feel a duty to stay around because there are children involved. Maybe they're concerned about the children. In the case of men, I also think that they might feel embarrassed to talk about it because there's definitely a perception from both men and women that a man who gets beaten up by a woman is a coward, is a pushover, and there's definitely a stigma attached to that. I think there's much less of a stigma to women who suffer domestic violence, and I don't mean to say that in a heartless way. It's a terrible, terrible thing to go through. But if a woman goes through domestic violence, everyone sympathizes with her, and they should, because it is a terrible thing. But if a man goes through it, this also ties into an issue about resources. There is an abundance of resources available to women in domestic violence situations. In this country, I believe there's one or two, literally just one or two, centres available for men who are victims of domestic violence. That is an utter disgrace. No wonder these guys don't want to report it because they don't have the facilities for doing so. And every police force in the country has to take this issue seriously. So any police officer that laughs in the face of a domestic violence victim, whether they be male or female, in my opinion, they don't deserve the job that they're in. They're supposed to be, their job is supposed to be protecting victims of crime. And given that assault, domestic violence is a crime, then you have to take it seriously. I'm not saying every single police officer behaves that way, but there is definitely an element of truth in that. But I don't want to just talk about the issue of domestic violence, as important as that is. I want to talk about some other issues as well. There's a self-defense argument. Now, I'm fortunate in that I've had relatively little experience of having to defend myself. On all the occasions that I did, that I can recall, it was a guy attacking me, and in those occasions, well, I think it took me by surprise, and at that time I wasn't into martial arts or anything, so I didn't have, you know, I just had to report to the police and was physically shocked that a total stranger would attack me for no reason, and yeah, but now it's a case of I think if I was to be attacked by someone, if it was a guy, I would absolutely um, hope that I would be prepared and that I wouldn't show the guy mercy. I wouldn't be sadistic. I wouldn't like beat him to a pulp when he's on the ground or something. But I would definitely fight back to an extent whereby it gives him something to think about. Um, Now, if a woman attacked me, let's say, for example, you have a drunk woman and she's pissed off about something and she just wants to take it out on the nearest stranger. Um, would I use the same level of force against her? Probably not, no. In fact, I wouldn't probably use the same level of force against any drunk because someone who's not in control over their actions, or I could even give a guy a light punch and he could stagger onto the road and get knocked down. So what I would do is, you know, hit him on the stomach or something, try to get him into a position whereby he couldn't attack me. But anyway, woman that attacked me, what would I do? I'd probably grab her wrist, try to physically restrain her, I'd push her off, and I think that's entirely legitimate. But there's an area that I think needs to be looked at. There's an assumption that all women are shrinking violets and all women are passive and physically weak. Now, we know that's not true. We know that's not true. There are some women who are physically stronger than other women, and it is also true, especially in this country, that women are just as capable of yobbish behaviour as men. Some of the worst crimes I have heard of involving grievous bodily harm in recent years have been women attacking either men or other women. And in most of those circumstances, especially if a man was a victim, they escaped jail. I think that's an utterly disgraceful situation. There was one young man who almost lost his sight because a drunk yob who happened to be female um, misunderstood something that he had supposedly said, and she glassed him. Now, there was outrage when she didn't go to jail from all decent-minded people, and I think we absolutely need to change that situation. We need to send out a message that that sort of violence is unacceptable, whoever is doing it. And I just felt I remember feeling very angry about that because okay, if a guy had done it, I'd still be angry, but at least the guy would have been sentenced. Um, and in this country, we do have a bit of a phenomenon with the so-called ladette culture, which I loathe. I think it's repulsive, and I don't think it's got anything to do with equality. I think it's just women who are very unpleasant individuals, and they think that they're acting like the guys, but what they're actually doing is acting like yobbish guys, or they think that they're proving something, but actually, when it comes down to it, they're just deeply unpleasant people, as all yobs are. But one situation I was going to talk about is let's imagine there's a scenario where you have a man and a woman on a date. And let's say the man is protective of his woman, he cares about her, and he would protect her in a heartbeat from anyone. Now, against another man, that would be easy. Just deck the guy, or he would have no sort of fear of any stigma from hitting the guy because most people would say, "Oh, the guy's a hero. He's protecting his woman." Now, what if the assailant? This is a very important point. What if the assailant or assailants are other women? Think about that for a second. And let's imagine the woman is very feminine sort of woman. She's not confrontational. She's a very gentle sort of person. And let's say she is attacked randomly by a drunk female yob. Now, would any sane person criticize the man for stepping in there and pushing the drunk yob off her or using physical force to do that? Really, would they? I think that anyone who says that I think anyone who criticizes that would have their head in the clouds. And there is a school of thought from some guys that if a man is being abused, going back to men here, he should just stand there and take it. I don't think there's anything noble about that, and I don't think it's. I just think that's stupid. Um, and guys tend to be pretty judgmental of other guys who. It's a sort of no-win situation because if you don't do anything, then you're seen as a pushover. Oh, look, he's getting beaten up by a woman. If you do something, then oh, look, he's using force against a woman. So I think we need to have some notion of egalitarianism here, because otherwise it just becomes a mockery of the word. And I think a lot of this comes down to a sort of old-fashioned chivalrous concept that, there's a huge taboo, especially in countries like Britain, about men who hurt women. And on some level, that is absolutely justified because there are men out there who think they can bully and beat up women. And just to be clear about this, those sort of guys disgust me. And I have heard young men, and this troubles me as a young man myself, talk in very casual terms about, oh, if the bitch done this, I'd kill her or I'd hit her or something like that. I'm very troubled by that, and I don't think you prove anything by behaving in that way. Um, but we have to acknowledge that there are violent women out there. Maybe not the same ratio as violent men, but the idea that they don't exist is incredibly naive, and the idea that you can just ignore them is also naive because a yob is a yob, and these people don't take no for an answer. You ignore them, then they'll demand why you aren't paying attention to them. You get into a verbal exchange with them, then they could well use violence. So everything is about common sense here, and I take the view that no one should get away with intimidating another member of society in that sort of way, especially a total stranger. It's nonsensical. So let me know your thoughts. I really hope I'm not misunderstood in this video because it's one of those sort of debates that people can be so easily mis. So just to be clear, I absolutely abhor violence against women. There are men out there who think they can do it, and I've contempt for those guys. They disgust me. But I also have no respect for women who think that they can do it because they're women and they'll get away with it. I think we need tougher penalties for those sort of people. Send out a message that actually it's not acceptable. Let me know your thoughts.